There has been a spiritual shift around the globe that started in the year 2020. The pandemic created a shift in everyone's lives around the world, bringing with it heavy spirits of confusion and fear. Only a few of us were operating under a spirit of faith during those unprecedented times. We were suddenly forced to make sound choices and decisions in many capacities of our lives, not just during the pandemic, but as we continue moving forward into these transformative years. What I've observed is that we're being forced into God's realignment, whether we recognize it or not. Living in the 2020s means understanding how to maneuver into realities, the natural and the spiritual. This means discerning between your desires, wants, and needs versus God's will for the world and for you. Understanding what you can control and what He is in control of. Living spiritually is living free. You're not bothered or hindered by people, circumstances, and emotions brought on by worldly events. However, if you allow yourself to live according to the world's standards, you'll put yourself in the line of fire. This decade requires spiritual maturity more than religion. It means learning to truly hear the voice of God and your spiritual guides to receive divine instructions. You must tune into your consciousness to elevate yourself during times when people just want to ignore what's happening because they don't want to disrupt their goals and personal desires or become accountable for their lives. Another observation I've noticed during these past couple decades, 2010 to 2020, is the Groundhog Day effect. Some people have been living the same life every year where literally nothing changes but the year. However, this decade of the 2020s has ignited a spiritual download of awakened consciousness where we are now observing what no longer makes sense in the world. Although some people are still truly functioning like the blind man without his stick and seeing eye dog, having no discernment of their surroundings. But we can no longer afford to live this way. When you're connected to a higher power, a spiritual belief such as God the Creator or whatever your beliefs are, your faith should naturally connect your spiritual discernment, helping you sense and recognize what is unfolding around you and in the world. I remember when the virus was spreading in China, my spiritual discernment told me this might spread globally. When I heard it had jumped to Italy, my spiritual discernment heightened, and I knew it was headed our way. I told my coworkers that the virus was going across the oceans, but no one believed me. They said, "Oh no, that stuff always stays over there. They always deal with stuff like SARS, etc., and nothing ever happens here." I said this was different because it had just jumped to Italy. They still looked at me like I was crazy. Then we all know what happened after that. Everyone was suddenly sent home in the middle of the day thinking we'd return in a few weeks. That few weeks ended up being over 2 years. Now that we're approaching the end of 5 years into this decade, what I've learned is that what was once normal is no longer, and the expectations of how it used to be are long gone. We can no longer expect anything based on historical data anymore. The 2020s require us to have a mindset that whatever hasn't happened before can, and most likely will, happen during these times. We can no longer say things won't happen just because the history books or past decade data hasn't shown such reports. Even things that happened 100 years ago have repeated in different ways, with similar patterns. The early 1900s flu pandemic happened from 1918 through 1920, the Great Influenza epidemic. History showed us this pattern 100 years later when the 2020 pandemic, which truthfully started in fall of 2019, unfolded. What we should have learned from the first few months of 2020 is the importance of keeping specific items stockpiled in case world events happen again. We should all have learned lessons about what will sustain our families and households if unforeseen events occur. In my observation, we're living in a weird karmic cycle of events taking place all at once. Some days I wake up wondering what has happened around the world while I was asleep. Is today going to be the day we all come to a screeching halt due to a natural disaster? Wildfires, earthquakes, volcanoes, unexpected flooding wiping out small towns. Let's not forget the strange events like the so-called drones in New Jersey, cyber attacks shutting down major Las Vegas hotels in 2023, and the alarming number of plane crashes and emergency landings happening monthly over the past year. But then I remind myself to stay rooted and anchored in God. So whatever is going on, I may hear His guidance. Activating consciousness in this decade is vital to sustain growth spiritually, physically, and mentally. We must be spiritually in tune with our surroundings as we pivot through this decade of unforeseen events happening around us day by day. The predictions of earthquakes and other world events aren't scare tactics meant to cause depression. They're put out for non-believers who seem to think nothing will ever happen, to help them become more conscious and understand it's time to renew their mindset. We no longer live in times where we can continue to say this will never happen. Instead, we move forward with the mindset of, if this happens, my plan will be ABC, XYZ, and continue onward, knowing and understanding that if things are to come, we're prepared. Be the director of your own life by following the guidance of God. Do not allow yourself to become encumbered with daily and worldly standards, beliefs, political views, and agendas. Focus on yourself and your immediate family, not the agendas of the world. Once you remove yourself from worldly agendas, it becomes easier to align with God's guidance and develop ears to hear and eyes to see. As we move into 2026, remember that living in the 2020s means understanding we're in the days of God's realignment. History is being rewritten before our eyes. For we live by faith, not by sight. My old self has been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. So I live in this earthly body by trusting in the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. What sorrow for those who say that evil is good and good is evil, that dark is light and light is dark, that bitter is sweet and sweet is bitter. The 2020s have called us to a higher level of spiritual awareness and maturity. As we navigate these unprecedented times, let us not function like the blind man without his stick and seeing-eye dog. Instead, let us walk with spiritual discernment, divine guidance, and unwavering faith as we thrive in God's realignment. Also, what I call 2020 Thrive.